4,700 guns against 100, 85 divisions against 43, 2,400 tanks against 0. In September 1939, France had every advantage imaginable on the Western Front. Germany's own generals expected to be overrun within 2 weeks. The Siegfried Line was a building site. The Luftwaffe was 1,000 kilometers away, and the French army, the most powerful land force in Europe, advanced 8 kilometers, occupied 20 empty villages, and went home. This is the story of the war that could have ended before it started. On May 19, 1939, French General Maurice Gamelin sat across from Polish War Minister Tadeusz Kasprzycki and signed a military convention. The promise was specific. If Germany attacked Poland, France would launch immediate airstrikes. A diversionary ground offensive would begin on day 3 after mobilization, and by day 15, no later than September 16th, France would throw its main forces into a full-scale assault on Germany. That was the deal. Poland would hold, France would attack. Germany would face a war on 2 fronts it could not win. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. France declared war 2 days later, and then almost nothing happened. On September 7th, 11 French divisions crossed into the German Saarland on a 32-kilometer front. They walked into empty villages. German customs officials chatted with their French counterparts across border barricades. Factories in Saarbrücken kept running. German troops hung propaganda banners that read, "French soldiers, we have no quarrel with you. We shall not fire unless you do." The French 32nd Infantry Regiment fought through the Warned Forest overnight, losing 4 Renault tanks to mines near Bleesbrook. There is one account that claims Gamelin ordered a herd of pigs driven through a minefield to clear a path. By September 12th, the French had advanced about 8 kilometers, 5 miles, and occupied roughly 20 evacuated villages. And then Gamelin stopped. He issued Personal Instruction Number 4, halt no closer than 1 kilometer from the Siegfried Line. Prepare to withdraw. On September 21st, he ordered the full retreat back to the Maginot Line. Meanwhile, he sent a message to Polish Marshal Riedz-Śmigły, claiming that more than half of France's frontline divisions were engaged in combat and that Germany had already pulled 6 divisions out of Poland to reinforce the West. Both statements were completely false. Only 11 of 85 available divisions had moved. There was no French air action at all. Here is what was actually waiting for France on the other side of that border. General Erwin von Witzleben's First Army, roughly 100,000 men in 13 hollow divisions. About 100 artillery pieces, no tanks, no anti-tank guns, no air support. Their infantry was armed with Maxim machine guns from the First World War. The Siegfried Line, which Nazi propaganda called impregnable, was barely 30% complete. General Jodl himself would later call it little better than a building site. So what was Gamelin looking at? Over 85 French divisions against maybe 43 understrength German ones, 4,700 artillery pieces against 100, 2,400 tanks against 0, and 90% of the Luftwaffe was 1,000 kilometers east, burning through 60% of its bomb stockpile over Poland. Those numbers are not a typo. France had a 3-to-1 advantage in divisions, a 47-to-1 advantage in artillery in the Saar sector. Total armor superiority, because Germany had literally nothing on the Western Front, and an enemy whose own generals would later testify, under oath at Nuremberg, that they expected to lose. So this is not a story about military weakness. France in September 1939 was the strongest land power in Europe. This is a story about something else entirely, about a doctrine built on fear, a general who chose caution over action, and a democracy so haunted by the last war that it couldn't fight the next one. Here is the question at the center of this video. On September 12, 1939, instead of signing that halt order, what if Gamelin had done the opposite? What if he had ordered all 40 available divisions to push through the Siegfried Line, a line that was barely a third built, with everything France had? The Rhine River was only about 110 kilometers from the starting position. General Westphal estimated that Germany could have held out for, and I want you to hear this number, 1 or 2 weeks. Now, I want to be clear about what comes next. Everything up to this point is documented history. What follows is a simulation, a what-if scenario built on real troop numbers, real logistics, real geography, and the testimony of the commanders who were actually there. This is not what happened, but based on everything we know, it is what could have happened, and honestly, the result is not what most people expect. Before we get into the simulation, if you find these kinds of deep dives interesting, consider subscribing. We break down alternate history scenarios like this every week, and each one is built on real data, not just speculation. All right, let's get into it. September 12, 1939. In our timeline, Gamelin signs the halt order. In this scenario, he signs an attack order instead. 40 divisions of the 2nd Army Group push forward across the Saar. The target: break through the Siegfried Line, cross the Rhineland, reach the Rhine River. Let's talk about what that actually means on the ground. The Siegfried Line sounds intimidating. Nazi propaganda had spent years calling it the West Wall, an impregnable fortress stretching the length of Germany's western border. And on paper, that is what it was supposed to be. 3 belts of concrete bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, and interlocking fields of fire. But in September 1939, the reality was very different. Only about 30% of the planned fortifications were finished. The transfer of construction responsibility from the Army to the Highway Ministry had created bureaucratic chaos. Field Marshal von Rundstedt reportedly inspected the line and laughed at what he saw. Many sections had nothing more than barbed wire and anti-tank ditches. And the Kaiserslautern Gap, a critical corridor running southeast toward Mannheim and the Rhine, was virtually undefended. Now, could France actually break through? Here is where it gets complicated. France had the tanks. The Char B-1 bis was a 28-ton monster with 60 millimeters of armor, a 75 millimeter hull gun, and a 47 millimeter turret gun. Nothing Germany had in the West could stop it. But by September 1939, only 84 B-1 bis had been produced. The faster Somua S-35, probably the best medium tank in the world at that point, had 191 units ready for combat. Add the Renault R-35s and Hotchkiss H-35s, and you get roughly 2,400 tanks across 40 battalions. But here is the problem. French doctrine did not use tanks the way Germany did. There were no massed panzer thrusts. French armor was parceled out in company-sized packets, spread across infantry divisions as support weapons. It was like having a Formula One car and driving it in first gear. The tanks were there. The doctrine to use them was not. Still, against what Witzleben had, which was essentially nothing armored, even poorly coordinated French tanks would be devastating. His 100,000 men had World War I machine guns, roughly 100 artillery pieces, and 0 anti-tank capability. There is a reason Keitel testified at Nuremberg that a French attack would have encountered, in his words, only a German military screen, not a real defense. So what does Witzleben do? He cannot counterattack. He has no reserves, no armor, no air cover. He calls Berlin, and Berlin faces a decision that would define the entire war. Germany's best troops, its panzer divisions, its Stuka squadrons, its elite infantry, are deep inside Poland. Warsaw has not fallen yet. It will hold out until September 27th. Modlin will resist until the 29th. The Wehrmacht cannot simply pull out. If Germany transfers divisions west, the Polish campaign slows dramatically. If it does not, the Western Front collapses. And the supply situation makes it worse. Adam Tooze documented that German ammunition stocks were sufficient for only a few weeks of fighting. The Luftwaffe had burned through 60% of its bomb reserves in just 22 days over Poland. Even if planes could be redeployed west, what would they drop? General Jodl would later confirm this at Nuremberg. He testified that the expenditure in ammunition, gasoline, and materiel during the Polish campaign was such as to preclude concurrent German operations on a similar scale in the West or elsewhere. So in the first week, France advances through a half-built defensive line, defended by an under-equipped army with no reinforcements coming. The advance is slow. French logistics run on horse-drawn artillery and a procurement system that one historian described as pulling guns from warehouses and in some cases museums. But it does not need to be fast. It just needs to keep moving. Because every day that passes, Germany bleeds resources in Poland that it cannot replace in the West. By the end of week 1, the realistic scenario is this. France has pushed through the Siegfried Line in at least 2 sectors, advanced perhaps 30 to 40 kilometers beyond Saarbrücken, and is approaching the outskirts of Kaiserslautern. German resistance is fierce in pockets, but crumbling overall. Witzleben is fighting a delay, not a defense. And that is when the real question begins. Can France reach the Rhine? From Saarbrücken to the Rhine at Mannheim is about 110 kilometers. Through the Kaiserslautern gap toward Worms, roughly the same. For a modern mechanized army, that is 2 or 3 days. For the French army of 1939, with its horse-drawn artillery, its cautious infantry doctrine, and its tanks scattered across dozens of small units, it is a different story. But remember what is on the other side, or rather, what is not. There are no German panzer divisions west of the Rhine. There is no organized reserve. The Luftwaffe is 1,000 kilometers east. Witzleben's men are falling back toward the river, blowing bridges as they go, fighting rearguard actions at river crossings and hilltop towns, trying to buy time for reinforcements that have not yet left Poland. In our simulation, by the end of week 2, French forces have advanced roughly 60 to 70 kilometers into German territory. They control the Saarland entirely. The industrial city of Kaiserslautern has fallen or is encircled. Lead elements are approaching the Rhine Valley. General Giraud, who in our timeline protested the withdrawal as a wasted opportunity, is pushing his 7th Army toward Trier and the Moselle, opening a second axis of advance toward Koblenz. And here is where something happens that has nothing to do with tanks or artillery. The German public panics. Remember what we learned from the Death of Democracy series. In September 1939, the German population did not want this war. Soldiers marching through Breslau were described as depressed, sullen, and furious at their leader. There was no patriotic fervor, no flags waving in the streets. The regime had manufactured passive acceptance through propaganda, but that acceptance was fragile. It rested on one assumption, that this would be quick, bloodless, and limited. Poland would be swallowed like Czechoslovakia. Now imagine the headlines. French troops on German soil, the Saarland lost, Kaiserslautern falling, air raid sirens in cities along the Rhine. For the first time since 1918, an enemy army is advancing into the heartland. The careful illusion of invincibility, the one thing holding public consent together, shatters. And in the shadows of Berlin, something stirs. In our timeline, a group of senior military officers spent the autumn of 1939 plotting against the regime. The Zossen conspiracy, named after the army headquarters south of Berlin, included General Ludwig Beck, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, and several other high-ranking officers who believed the war was suicidal. In our timeline, the plot went nowhere. The quick victory in Poland drained it of urgency. The generals who might have acted told themselves there was still time. But in this scenario, there is no quick victory to hide behind. Germany is losing on 2 fronts simultaneously. The Polish campaign is grinding on because troops cannot be spared for the West. And French soldiers are standing on German soil for the first time in 20 years. Does the conspiracy act? We cannot know for certain. But we do know this. Beck had already written letters urging Brauchitsch, the commander-in-chief of the army, to move against the regime. Canaris told a colleague on August 31st that invading Poland meant the end of Germany. What they lacked was not conviction. It was a trigger, a visible, undeniable failure that would give them cover to act. A French army on the Rhine might have been that trigger. But let us not get ahead of ourselves. Because there is a problem nobody talks about in these what-if scenarios, and it changes everything. The French army cannot cross the Rhine. Think about what that means. The Rhine is not just a river. It is one of the widest, deepest, fastest-flowing rivers in Europe. The bridges will be demolished long before France arrives. The Germans are methodical about that, even in retreat. And the French army of 1939 has no doctrine for opposed river crossings. No specialized engineering units trained for the task. No amphibious capability. Their heavy artillery is still catching up on horse-drawn limbers, days behind the lead infantry. So the realistic scenario is not France marching into Berlin. It is France standing on the west bank of the Rhine, looking across at a German army that is finally consolidating on the other side. The Rhineland is French, the Saarland is French, but Germany proper, the industrial heartland, the Ruhr, Berlin, remains out of reach. This is the part most alternate history discussions skip. They imagine French tanks rolling into the Ruhr Valley. But the Ruhr is 247 kilometers from Saarbrücken. Even if France controlled everything west of the Rhine, the Ruhr sits on the other side. And now the Luftwaffe comes home. The Polish campaign is effectively over by early October. German air units begin redeploying west. And here is a detail that matters more than most people realize. The Luftwaffe in 1939 was qualitatively superior to the French Air Force. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 outclassed most French fighters. German pilots had more training hours, better tactics, and experience from Spain. A French army strung out across the Rhineland, its supply lines stretching back over 100 kilometers of newly captured territory, now becomes a target. So by the end of week 3, the situation crystallizes into something that looks nothing like a clean victory and nothing like a defeat. France holds the Rhineland. Germany holds everything east of the Rhine and is rapidly reinforcing. The Luftwaffe is beginning to contest the skies, and both sides are staring at each other across a river that neither can easily cross. Does this sound familiar? It should, because what we have just described is not the end of World War II. It is the beginning of something that looks uncomfortably like World War I. So here is what most people assume when they hear this scenario. France attacks. Germany collapses. The war ends in 1939. 75 to 85 million people do not die. The camps are never built. The bombs never fall on London or Dresden or Tokyo. A better world. And I wish I could tell you that is how it plays out. But based on everything we have covered, the logistics, the doctrine, the geography, the honest answer is more complicated, and in some ways, more unsettling. Let us play out the 3 realistic endings. Ending 1. The attritional stalemate. France holds the Rhineland. Germany holds everything east of the river. Both sides dig in. The Luftwaffe hammers French positions. French artillery pounds German cities across the water. Casualties mount. The Western Front of 1939 starts looking like the Western Front of 1916. Trenches, mud, attrition. Except this time it is happening on German soil, and the French public, the same public that coined the phrase, "Why die for Danzig?" has to be convinced to keep dying for Kaiserslautern. How long does that last? Months? A year? French democracy was fragile enough in 1939 without the added weight of a grinding offensive war. Ending 2. The negotiated peace. Faced with French occupation of the Rhineland and a stalled Polish campaign, Berlin sues for terms. France gets the Saar and the Rhineland back, permanently this time. Germany withdraws from Poland, or at least Western Poland. The regime survives, weakened but intact. And here is the part that should keep you up at night. A wounded, humiliated regime with its core territory intact, its industrial base untouched east of the Rhine, and a population that just watched a foreign army take their land again. Does that sound like a formula for lasting peace? Or does it sound like Versailles all over again? The exact conditions that created the problem in the first place. Ending 3. The internal collapse. Military failure triggers the Zossen conspirators. Beck, Canaris, and sympathetic generals move against the regime. The leader is removed, arrested, or eliminated. A military government takes power and negotiates an immediate ceasefire. This is the best-case scenario. But even here, the questions multiply. Does the new German government accept permanent loss of the Rhineland? Do the Soviets, who invaded eastern Poland on September 17th under the secret protocol with Berlin, simply give it back? Does Japan recalculate its expansion plans, or does the Pacific War happen anyway on a different timeline? There is a line from Churchill that cuts to the heart of this. He wrote in The Gathering Storm that the battle had been lost some years before, when Germany built a conscript army and reoccupied the Rhineland in 1936 without consequence. By September 1939, the easy window had already closed. What remained was not a window to victory. It was a window to a different kind of war, possibly shorter, possibly less catastrophic, but not clean, not simple, and not guaranteed to produce the better world we want to imagine. The real tragedy is not that France failed to win a war in September 1939. The real tragedy is that by September 1939, there were no good options left, only less terrible ones. So what do we actually learn from this? I think the Saar offensive teaches us something that goes beyond military strategy. It teaches us about the cost of inaction when the evidence is staring you in the face. France in September 1939 had every material advantage: more troops, more guns, more tanks, an enemy that was stretched thin and running low on ammunition, generals on the other side who fully expected to be attacked and fully expected to lose. The data was there, the opportunity was there, and the people in charge looked at all of it and chose to do nothing. Not because they were stupid. Gamelin was not an idiot. He was a decorated veteran of the First World War who understood the cost of offensive warfare better than most people alive. His caution came from experience, from watching a generation of young men walk into machine gun fire on the Somme and at Verdun. He built his entire strategy around one principle: never again. And that principle, born from genuine trauma, produced a different catastrophe. By trying to avoid the horrors of 1914, France enabled the horrors of 1939 through 1945. 75 to 85 million dead, a continent in ruins. Horrors that would have been unimaginable even to the veterans of the trenches. There is a painful symmetry here. On one side of the border, a population that did not want war but followed orders anyway. On the other side, a population that did not want war and chose not to fight. Both paths led to the same place. I do not think September 1939 could have produced a clean victory, but I do think it could have produced a shorter war, a less catastrophic one. And sometimes, in history, less terrible is the best you can hope for. The tragedy is that France did not even try. If you want to see what would have happened if Germany had never invaded Poland in the first place, if diplomacy had actually worked in the summer of 1939, that is coming next. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it.